Welcome to the Chapter 1 mini lecture on globalization. Now, in this chapter, I want to provide to you a firm foundation of exactly what globalization is and how globalization is impacting our business environment. Up until this point, your focus has been primarily of a domestic nature, and this course challenges you to evaluate and consider variables that simply do not exist in our domestic economy. Now, in this course, I want you to keep something in mind. The United States is a foreign country. Foreign country does not mean non-U.S. in this course. It only means a country. It means that a foreign country is a country that is not of one's original origin. Okay, it is a host country. Canon is a Japanese company. It has a plant in Newport News. From Canon's point of view, the United States is a foreign country. It is the same thing with Steel in Virginia Beach. Steel is a German company that has a business investment in the market of the United States. The United States is the foreign country. And as Americans, we tend to be myopic when we think of international trade. We are certainly a foreign market as well in some context. Now, when we think about globalization, we think about an increasing level of integration among countries in an ever-expanding free trade environment that allows for the free flow of capital and the identification of market advantages in other countries. These advantages might include cheaper labor, an increasing supply of raw materials, lowering the cost of materials, and even more favorable government regulation for our industries. Although we may not completely support this idea of globalization, it is a business reality. It is also a consumer reality. Americans are always looking for lower prices and greater opportunity to acquire material things. So until that trend changes, globalization will be a great driver in our getting what we want. Now, globalization is not just one thing, it is many things. Globalization can include greater integration of world markets, but it can also include a more worldview-oriented approach to politics. It can mean that the economic downturn in one market can be felt in many other markets. It can provide for greater opportunity to access crucial services or critical services, like what has occurred in the medical industry via medical tourism. It can mean that we get to experience foreign cultures right here on our own doorstep through foreign language television, bilingual customer service agents, and through our own personal relationships with people migrating to this country. Now, many people have a concern about globalization. Globalization can be a threat to precious ancient cultures and to job security in some industries. It can mean that our own market may become less productive as more and more production-oriented jobs are exported to other countries. We are left with a high technology, information-driven, value-added type of society that earns its money by sharing what it knows, not necessarily what it can do or build. And these side effects can have far-reaching consequences to us individually and professionally. In considering integration of markets, we are talking about the melting together of national marketplaces into one huge global market. And you may find that people in Venezuela now want the same type of products that we do here in America. You may find that people in Indonesia seek the same luxury items that we seek for ourselves. We do not want to accept this as being entirely a good thing because there's a great value in diversity. Ultimately, we do not want our markets to be all the same. In many countries where native cultures are being influenced by materialistically oriented Western markets, the governments are now regulating what television stations can be viewed, what clothes can be sold, what technology is readily available, and under what circumstances students can study in foreign countries. And while it might be nice to be able to buy the latest edition of Microsoft Windows, regardless of which country you were in at the time, it is also nice to experience the exciting differences between the Brazilian market, the Japanese market, and the Peruvian market. When we speak of globalization of production, we are speaking of the extent to which goods and services are acquired internationally. Now, many companies that manufacture a product take a careful look at the price of their component parts and will naturally gravitate to the low-cost producer. In this particular chart that was compiled by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it is a comparison of what the hourly compensation rates are in the different countries, from Norway Let's look at 2011 at $64.15 an hour, all the way down to the Philippines at $2.01 an hour. Now, where is China and India? Well, here's the comment from the BLS regarding China and India, that there's so many data gaps and methodology differences between China, India, and how we compile our own data. There's not a direct comparison between the labor costs in China, India, and the United States. Now, now that information is still available. You just have to go for another. You have to go to another section in the Bureau of Labor Statistics in order to gather that information. Now, ultimately, the manufacturer is looking to lower overall cost and cost of goods sold. And in the beginning, globalization of production was founded upon the sourcing of inputs. Then it moved to outsourcing. And outsourcing required that processes be moved overseas so that the functions could be fulfilled by foreign suppliers. And the outsourcing of these processes moved many indirect jobs overseas, while the acquisition of parts from foreign sources moved many of the direct jobs overseas. Now, there's no doubt that globalization is happening. We can see it all around us in the cars that we buy and the televisions that we watch and how we communicate and in the clothes we wear. There are specific reasons or drivers why globalization is happening. Money and technology. When we think of money, we think of reduced costs of acquiring goods from other countries through free trade initiatives and the worldwide availability of capital. And when we think of technology, we think of communication advantages, email, satellite, and video conferencing capabilities, rapid access to the latest information, and high-speed, reliable transportation. But for much of the 20th century, nations protected their markets, their natural resources, and their labor markets by erecting barriers to trade. And the barriers might be a duty or an import tax, or goods coming, and these taxes were placed on goods coming into their country, or in limiting the actions of foreign investors. Governments did not want to import too much, nor did they want to give up any sovereignty by allowing major acquisitions to occur in their country. And the results of this protectionist type of attitude included higher import duties, a reduction in available investment capital, and retaliation among countries as they aggressively tried to influence each other's political positions. And after World War II, this started to change. The Western world led the charge to reduce or remove many of these trade barriers. Now, when we speak of import duties, we are specifically speaking of a tax that is placed on the import of goods, and there are two types. Specific duties are levied as a fixed amount against each unit of product being sold or being imported. Ad valorem duties are levied as a percentage or amount against the value of each unit that is being imported. And when these taxes are collected, they go to the government of the importing country. And because the importer or the company bringing in the goods pays this tax, it has the impact of increasing the cost of the goods to the customer. And you can quickly see that if we are operating under a completely free trade environment where these duties and taxes are not paid, each country is faced with an enormous volume of foreign competition. And that is why some import taxes are used as a tool to artificially inflate the value of foreign goods. Now let's look at steel for an example. There is an anti-dumping duty placed on many steel imports. And the purpose of an anti-dumping duty is a little different from a specific or ad valorem tax. The purpose of the anti-dumping duty is to level the playing field between foreign competition and domestic producers. And when foreign steel comes into the United States, the government assesses a tremendous tax on it, sometimes upwards of 50 to 90%. That essentially moves the price, removes the price competition between foreign and domestic suppliers. And we can look at this activity on the surface and say that we like it because it protects us from foreign competition. But ultimately, as the consumer, we are the ones who end up paying the higher prices. Now, another impact of these duties is that it reduces efficiency. So let's think about this from the manufacturer's point of view. If the manufacturer already knows that there are protective duties in place that will prevent outright and direct competition from a foreign competitor, the manufacturer has no motivation to make process improvements or supplier changes that reduce cost or increase productivity. Another example of reduced productivity involves allocations of the factors of production. Well, let's say that a domestic producer is using a high amount of land to grow bananas. Now, in the United States, that would not be a very good use of the land, since there are countries where conditions are far greater for the growing of bananas. But since the U.S. producer has nothing to fear from foreign competition, the producer may continue to use the land in this manner instead of converting it over to a higher and better, more profitable use. So from time to time, a country may also impose an export duty. And when a country does this, they are usually doing it solely for the purpose of revenue collection. And typically the government will select its high volume exports for this type of duty. Now, if international trade is the movement of goods and services in and out of a country, then foreign direct investment is the movement of money in and out of the country. An investment coming into the country is inflow, and investment leaving a country is outflow. And with the increased globalization in both markets and production, moving both product and capital, the need for global institutions come into play. And these institutions include the World Trade Organization, previously known as the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, and finally the United Nations. Now, since we will be having our groups make presentations on some of these organizations, I will not be expanding on these organizations, as they are already introduced in the textbook and will be expanded upon in your desk side presentations to the class. Now, although the international organizations expedite the flow of product and capital, this is not the only important driver. Technology is another important driver. With the expanded capability in the areas of communication, information processing, and transportation, it is now very inexpensive to communicate and forge multinational relationships. And when these relationships form and solidify, ideas, capital, information, and loyalties are all exchanged. And the internet helps people and businesses find each other in the global marketplace. Transportation allows for face-to-face relationships to form. Recently, video conferencing has replaced travel as the primary method by which these face-to-face relationships are formed. Now, when we think specifically of transportation, we need to look at the steady decline in the cost of transportation. Whether or not it is the movement of people or goods, the innovations in travel have facilitated the globalization of production and markets. Now, the place that the United States holds in the global trade environment has changed dramatically over the last 50 years. Although in 1963 the United States produced the majority of the world's output, that situation has dramatically changed. And however, the position of the United States does continue to grow. Now, this chart came from the World Trade Organization, and I like this chart because it specifically looks at export activity, or what is leaving the country. Now, you can plainly see that we've been overtaken as the #1 exporter by the European Union and developing Asia. However, we are still holding a close third place. You will also see that there is a general upward trend in volume, although there appears to be a change in that trend for 2013. Of course, you will also see that same drop in export volume from Europe as well. From an import perspective, the U.S. closely follows the same trend line with developing Asia and Japan when considering our import volume. Are we in an ideal situation? No, but we are not failing to keep pace with the trade volumes. We're just not #1 anymore. And the reason for the decline may be more closely related to the growing economic development and industrialization of the world economy, industrialization of the world economy, rather than just a bleak picture for the United States. Now, another area that is considered to be a globalization driver is foreign direct investment, or FDI. And foreign direct investment is the most secure form of market entry. And the market entry is the method by which a company will establish a foothold in a foreign market. And we will go into different types of market entry later. However, for our purposes here, we will only speak of foreign direct investment, or FDI. Now, a company or an individual who opts to make a substantial investment in a cause or business in a foreign country is considered to have a great deal of control in terms of cost controls, protection of know-how and trade secrets, and operational control. And after all, if a country wishes to attract a foreign investor, whether individual or corporate, they have to guarantee that the investment will be protected and that the source of funds will be protected from exploitation. And for the purpose of this lecture, we will presume that most foreign direct investment comes from wealthy Western corporations and countries and flows in the direction of developing nations. Now, this is one area where globalization has actually dampened the business environment. And with the growing trends in globalization, the dominance of the U.S. as the largest provider of funds has changed. We now can reasonably expect that growing multinational firms in developing economies are going to provide an ever-increasing portion of the world's stock of foreign direct investment. We have traditionally thought of multinational firms as massive, hard-hitting, highly competitive conglomerates, but that's changing as well. There's a growing trend in the number of mini multinationals, wherein medium and small-size companies are taking on this form of market entry. In the past, there were several communist markets that were off limits to Western business. And throughout the 90s, as these countries, Russia, former Soviet bloc countries, China, became more open to trade, the opportunities in international business became significant. And there are trends that indicate that the original movement toward a more democratic form of government may be wavering. However, this doesn't mean that formerly communist countries are reverting back to communism. It may mean, however, that there will be significantly more control placed on economic activities and that a more authoritative approach to market control may prevail in countries like Russia and China. And let's not forget about Latin America, where market reforms are trying to take hold. Traditionally, dictators in this area of the world would bar foreign direct investment as a way of protecting their countries from Western domination. And this was not the only reason for restricted FDI. These areas have had a problem with hyperinflation and debt, which held them in an economic state of very, very low growth. And at this day and age, we are looking at our markets becoming more integrated into a single interdependent and global economic system. Now, there is a worldwide trend of government deregulation through government deregulation, privatization, and opening of markets. Many people fear a one world order, but in reality there's a big difference between a global economy and full globalization. Countries can change their mind. There may be power vacuums that develop and they move away from a more liberalized market system. And if countries do not transition quickly enough or successfully enough into a free market system, they may return to the original methods of managing their economies. Of course, there may be other opportunities in these countries, but these opportunities may change and may come at a higher risk. So why would so many people be against globalization? If the world becomes more prosperous under a free trade system and under globalization, then why would people be against it? And this type of change may result in the loss of national industries, loss of jobs, downward pressure on wages, especially at the unskilled worker level, increased environmental problems, and loss of unique and precious cultures because of overexposure to more dominant cultures. Although these fears are real, leaders in globalization must do a better job to address these fears and to protect those cultures and the national resources and the natural resources that each country holds so dear. In reality, as long as individual countries feel that they have something to protect, globalization will probably never result in a complete form of uniformity across all cultures. And now that we are looking at protecting domestic industries, one way that is accomplished is through subsidies. And basically the government pays its domestic producer in order to offset the cost of productions. Now, subsidies may reduce production cost or allow the domestic producer to better compete or to encourage exports. Agriculture is usually the highest recipient of subsidies. And there's a huge debate on whether or not the payment of subsidies is a good investment for our tax dollars. Are we really gaining anything when we pay subsidies? After all, they have the same impact as anti-dumping duties in that they discourage meaningful innovations and adjustments in the production process that might lead to greater efficiencies and economies of scale. And another way that we protect our domestic industries is through the imposition of an import quota. This merely limits the quantity of goods that can be imported. Now, a tariff rate quota is a type of duty or tax that is applied to imports within quantity ranges. And the initial imports into the country will have a lower duty rate. As more quantities are received, then duty rates go up. And from time to time, a country may voluntarily restrict its own quantities that it is shipping to a particular country to prevent protective duties to be placed on those products. Let me say this again. When we're talking about voluntary export restraints, from time to time, a country may voluntarily restrict its own quantities that it is shipping to a particular country to prevent protective duties in the destination country to be placed against their products. And these voluntary restrictions in quantity are called voluntary export restraints and are initiated by the exporting country, not the destination country. So let's now think about protectionism as a function of government or a control aspect and not a financial one. There are plenty of barriers to trade that do not involve the payment of duties. For example, a country may require a certain percentage of product to be produced domestically. And these types of restrictions are called local content requirements. Now let's say that our government were to tell our automobile manufacturers that 40% of the cars they produce had to come from U.S. sources of origins. And that would mean that in order for a car to be sold, it would have to contain 40% U.S. parts and could not exceed that amount. And this requirement is often placed on government contractors. If the federal government puts out a contract for bid, it may require that a substantial part of the supplies or inputs used come from U.S. sources. Now, there are also administrative policies that are basically bureaucratic requirements that make it difficult to import a particular product. And the more difficult you make it, the lower the volume of imports of the product you will have. Sometimes an administrative policy may just be a burdensome documentation requirement. So if government intervention can ultimately lead to inefficiencies, increased cost to the consumer, and a strained international market condition, why would we want government intervention at all? Well, to name a few, we want protection for our domestic jobs and our domestic industries. We want to protect our national security. We want to make sure that our consumers are receiving high quality products that are not tainted by lower foreign standards of production. We may also want to make use of our market as leverage in getting what we want from other countries. Some of our trading partners do not have the best record when it comes to human rights. If we control how we trade with those countries, we may be able to influence at what rate they reduce the incidence of these human rights violations. Now, countries that are regular trading partners are less likely to go to war in a military sense. They are more likely to engage in trade wars. In addition, if we want lower prices in on our store shelves, we have to be willing to give foreign competitors access to our markets. And as the consumer, we benefit from the lower prices. Now, when we look at the overall business environment, we ask three questions when it comes to business and foreign direct investment. Why would a company select FDI instead of just exporting or licensing? And two, why do companies in the same industry tend to invest in the same foreign markets? And the last question, if it's cheaper to export or to license, why do all companies tend to invest in the same foreign markets? The third one is a hybrid question from the original two questions. But to answer these questions, we have to look at market entry models. If a company decides only to export their goods to the target market, they have very little control on what happens to that product after it's shipped to the customer. The customer can resell it, they can tear it apart to see how it works, they can produce a cheaper model and go into direct competition with the person or the company in the United States that sold them the original products. And although and the other thing is exporting can be expensive based upon currency exchange rates and transportation costs. Now, although licensing gives a foreign customer the right to produce and distribute a product, the foreign customer must pay a royalty for that right. And the danger is that the company gives the foreign company a valuable know-how on how that product is produced. Another problem with licensing involves quality. For example, if a company with a license wants to reduce its production cost, it may opt to use cheaper materials or untrained labor in order to meet cost savings objectives. The final product would be of a lower quality and could damage the good name of an otherwise strong brand. So if a company wants control over how the product is distributed, it wants quality control, and it wants to get its product as close to the final customer as it can without added transportation cost, a company might select FDI over any other form of market entry. But if all of these exist, what is the advantage for the host country? I mean, the host country receives the actual investment, which boosts their economy. The foreign company will hire workers of the host country, which will have a positive impact on employment and labor utilization. The host country will also be able to offset the value of the products it is importing, which will help with the trade balance. But if the host country receives these benefits, what are the costs? The host country's domestic producers may have less power when negotiating with the government or with local suppliers. And with money coming into the country, there is also money going out of the country to the parent company. So host countries want to make sure that they're gaining more than they are losing. And of course, there's always the risk that a country's sovereignty might suffer if the host country's government is weaker than this powerful multinational corporation. So in order to maximize the way markets work together, the countries will sometimes get together and form economic alliances. And these alliances range from a free trade area where the level of integration is minimal, all the way to a full political union where the individual countries give up their sovereignty. So in a free trade area, all the barriers to trade are removed for the countries that are members of the free trade area. The most enduring free trade area is the European Free Trade Association, which started in 1960 among the countries of Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. And the next level is a customs union like the Andean Pact, which allows the countries of Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela to trade freely amongst themselves, but assesses a duty to all outside countries. And the next level of economic integration is the common market like Mercosur, which includes Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And these countries have no trade barriers amongst themselves. They have a common external trade policy toward all non-member nations, and they share labor and capital in the form of free immigration and immigration and cross-border financial flows. And then comes the economic union, like the European Union, which unifies all member countries, but also requires a common currency, a common external trade policy, and complete harmonization of the tax rates. Monetary and fiscal policy must be agreed upon by all the member nations. And finally, there's a political union, which means that one central power regulates the economic, social, and foreign policy of the member states. And this involves giving up a significant amount of power, and it is the direction in which the EU is heading. However, it is not done yet. The United States is a better example of a political union wherein the states have power but are combined into one single nation. And we've talked a lot about the movement of products between nations, and it touched on some foreign direct investment elements, but we now need to expand this into a review of the foreign exchange markets. Now, after all, the foreign exchange market is where one can acquire the currency of another country at a price called the exchange rate. Now, the foreign exchange market serves two purposes. One, it converts currency, and two, it provides some protection against foreign exchange risk, which can occur when there are unpredictable changes in the exchange rates. Now, chances are that when a company engages in international trade, say using the export model where the products are manufactured here but shipped to foreign locations, the manufacturer here wants to get paid in US dollars. And the only way that can happen is if the buyer in the foreign country can acquire US dollars to pay them. If the country allows for the buying and selling of foreign currency, then it is a banking process and the payments are made. If there are controls placed on the buying and selling of the currency, then the process can become more burdensome. Now, currency speculation occurs when you have a business that regularly trades with a country and wants to either purchase the currency for later use or is purchasing it for an investment. The idea is that if the currency is purchased today, it will be worth more in the future, or at least not appreciate. It will be worth more in the future, or will at least not depreciate. By purchasing currency in advance, the company can control how much foreign exchange risk it is willing to accept. Some countries will take this step further by even borrowing the foreign currency when the interest rates are lower in that country and investing in another currency. And that's called carry trade. And carry trade is not as popular as it once was, but it is used, but it can be used as a tool and has been used between the US dollar and the Japanese yen. Now, the foreign exchange market has its own vocabulary. The spot exchange rate of a currency is the exchange rate that is available for a currency on the spot or right now. The spot rates change continuously, often on a minute-by-minute basis, and a foreign exchange rate is the exchange rate that will be available for a currency on a future date. It is a negotiated exchange rate at the time of the purchase of the currency. Now, from time to time, a company might engage in a currency swap, which is the simultaneous purchase and sale of currency at two different dates. If funds are moving temporarily, the currency swap is a way to make that happen while managing the risk. Now, the foreign exchange market is not a market. It is not a building. It is not a city, and you cannot visit it. It is a network that spans the globe and contains banks and brokers and foreign exchange dealers. And exchange rates are usually determined by supply and demand of a currency relative to another one. Supply and demand doesn't explain everything, but it gets us pointed in the right direction. Inflation rates play a part in currency values, along with interest rates and market psychology. Now, before we get into currency exchange evaluation, let's look at a fundamental theory called the law of one price, which is said to link exchange rates between countries based on their price levels. The law of one price states that if two competitive markets are free of transportation costs and barriers to trade, that identical products in the markets should sell for the same price when they're expressed in the local currency. Now, while this might be theoretically true, a shift in supply and demand in one country would also impact the sales price of the product. If this law of one price is true, then purchasing power parity can be seen in any comparative set of prices, but in this case the markets would have to be efficient and the prices being offered would have to include all the latest information about the product, company, and economy. Now, the idea is that purchasing power parity will force a change in the relative prices that will force a change in the exchange rates. If prices are going up, inflation, if prices are going up as in inflation, then the country should expect to see the value of their currency drop relative to a country with lower inflation rates. So why does inflation occur? It occurs in response to a change in the money supply. If the quantity of money in circulation rises faster than the stock of goods and services, then there's inflation. So when our government increases the money supply, it is essentially giving people more money. Ultimately, when the quantity of money is increased, inflation will follow. And if you memorize the following statement, you will have it all in perspective. When the growth in a country's money supply is faster than the growth in its output, it fuels price inflation. Now, when there is rapid inflation, many countries will restrict the conversion of currency to keep people from selling off what currency they have. And it makes sense if you think about it. If you're holding money today that will be worth less tomorrow, you want to get it off your hands today. And whether it means purchase precious metals, invest it, sell it off, or convert it, you don't want to hold on to an asset, even cash, when it is depreciating in value. So economic theory reveals that rates are subject to inflation, and that includes interest rates. The Fisher effect illustrates the relationship between the nominal interest rates, inflation, and the real interest rates. Now, the nominal interest rate is the total of the real interest rate and the inflation rate. And you can calculate the nominal interest rate on both the money you deposit and the money you borrow. And either way, your nominal interest rate will be impacted by inflation. And the Fisher effect should be considered whenever there is borrowing or lending relationships in play. Now, in this economy, we are not earning a whole lot of interest on our banking accounts. Even our money market accounts are not producing a good interest rate. In essence, our inflation rate is eating up any interest we would make on our accounts. No interest to be gained here, right now at least. When we expand the Fisher effect to include exchange rates, the international Fisher effect states that for any two countries, the spot exchange rate should change in an amount equal to, but in the opposite direction to the difference in the nominal interest rates between the two countries. Now, we haven't really changed anything here except that we are now looking at the differences between the nominal interest rates between two countries rather than what is going on in just one country. And we'll go over this in more detail when we get into class. Now, this includes the Workshop 1 mini lecture. You need to prepare your questions for class. You might want to listen to this again. Certainly this lecture is in supplement to you reading the textbook and the Workshop 1 chapters that you need to read, chapters 1 and 6 through 9. But prepare your questions and we'll answer them at the beginning of class.